I'm Jennifer, and this is my true story. So yeah, growing up, I think I always kind of equated like value as a person or worth as a person with success, material success. So by 21, I was kind of starting this career, and that was where I was getting all of my worth from, for sure. And I just had this image of what I wanted my life to be like. Like I wanted to have like the great job and the big house and the nice car and like the handsome husband that's successful. And then just, a couple of like these little kids that I don't know were like Gap models. I don't know. Like that's just kind of the idea that I had going through my head of what you're supposed to be working for and what it means to be successful and to like be a good member of society. So I was kind of just going along that path, and everything was going great for me. And about 2 weeks after my future husband and I started dating, we were on one of those like long romantic walks where you're like talking about everything, and he asked me what my worst fear was, and I told him that my worst fear was having a disabled child. I have a couple of uncles that are disabled, and they've just had really, really difficult lives that, on the outside to me just looked really unfulfilling and sad. And that was just the worst thing that I could imagine happening to me or to my child, is having to deal with this like sad, just like pitiable situation. So anyway, we got married, and we were still just kind of going along, and everything was great. I had a really good job, and we pretty much did whatever we wanted to do, like whenever we wanted to do. So we bought a house when we were like 22, and we traveled and went out to eat all the time, and that was kind of what our life was, and it was good. And it's what I thought I wanted. That's like what I thought that I needed to, I don't know, be like a successful, proud person in society. And so we got pregnant a couple years after we got married. They told me that they did all of the genetic testing at like your week 20 appointment. And I was like, is there any way you can do it sooner? Because I'm so anxious and worried about there being something wrong. And so we actually ended up doing all of the genetic testing that they do a month early. And then I got the results, and they're like, oh, everything's normal. The baby's totally perfect. You're fine. And I was just so relieved, like, that I was going to have this like perfect baby like I had imagined. And so about a month before my due date, I don't know, 36 and a half weeks, 3 weeks before my due date, the baby like stopped moving. And after a couple hours, I felt kicks just really occasionally, but not nearly as often as I had been. And so we called up my doctor, and she was like, just go into the hospital, just let him do some tests, make sure everything's okay. So once he got home from school and I got home from work, we went to the hospital, and they hooked me up to monitors. And even then they did like another really in-depth ultrasound, and they were like, everything looks fine. But your baby is not responding. So they basically were like, you can sit in a hospital bed for until you go into labor, so the next month, or we can just go ahead and induce you. Technically 37 weeks is full term, and you're like at 36 and a half. So that's pretty close. And they were like, the baby looks pretty good. The size is okay. So we got to the hospital at like 4 p.m. to start the non-stress testing. And by 10, they started trying to induce me. And that took, they gave me the medicine and stuff and would come and check on me periodically. And the baby's heart was having deceleration, so his heartbeat would slow way down and then speed back up again. And they couldn't figure out why, but everything still looked normal. But the inducement didn't work. So they'd given me all these medications, and I was still having like just really mild, very occasional contractions by the next morning. And so a new OB came in, the one that was on call, and she was just like, we're just going to like flood you with this drug, the Pitocin, to like kickstart your labor. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it'll be fine. And I just remember sitting there in the hospital bed with like Steven next to me, my husband next to me, looking at this doctor that I'd really never met before because she was just the one on call. And I had this really clear voice in my head that was just like, you have to have a C-section. And initially I just was like, ignored it, because that's crazy. Like, modern medicine, you don't want a C-section. It has like, you know, it's a surgery, so it has all these risks of complications, and it can cause complications in future pregnancies. And like, kind of the idea is you do a regular birth whenever you can, and you don't do a C-section unless you have to. And so initially I ignored it. And the doctor kept talking, and I think she was calling the nurse to give me this medication, and I had another just really strong, louder, kind of more insistent voice say, you have to have a C-section. And so at that point, I think I don't know what changed my mind to like listen to that voice. I think just recognizing that, you know, I've had experiences like that in the past, but they've always been more just like little bumps or promptings to maybe do this or do that. This was the first time that it was just so clear. And so I stopped the doctor and I said, you know, I think I need to have a C-section instead. And she looked at me like I was nuts, because that's like totally against every like, you know, process and procedure that they have. They don't do unnecessary C-sections here in the US very often. And I think even my husband initially was a little like, what? Like, what are you thinking? And yeah, the doctor just like, she sat there and she argued with me, and she was like, you don't understand, and the induction is going to be way better. And I just kind of held my ground, and I was like, no, I'm having a C-section. And I like felt a little like judged, like crazy selfish lady who like doesn't want to go through labor or whatever. But I felt really strongly about it, and so that's what we did. And so they scheduled it. It took about 12 hours. We had to wait in the hospital all day. And I ended up having the C-section. And the next morning, when the pediatrician came in, he told us, I guess, that they saw these signs consistent with Down syndrome. And I pretty much lost it. I mean, I was just sobbing. Initially, for me, it was really shocking, especially thinking that they had just done a really complete ultrasound the night before and still didn't see anything. And they still, from all they could see, everything was normal. And so those first couple of days as I was in the hospital recovering from the C-section were really difficult. And probably, I don't know, the day or two after Ethan was born, they started doing just some tests. So he actually was fine. He didn't need to be in the NICU or anything, but they did do some tests that they just normally do when you get a diagnosis like that. And one of them was an echocardiogram on his heart. And he did actually have some minor heart defects that they hadn't been able to see on the ultrasound even the day before he was born. They had no idea. And after the results of the echo came back, it was, you know, maybe 2 days after he was born, I was still in the hospital recovering, and the OB the woman that had been on call that had fought with me about having a C-section, she actually came into my hospital room and she apologized, and she was like, I have no idea how you knew, but your baby wouldn't have survived a normal labor with the heart condition that he has. The stress would have been too much. Like, best case scenario, you would have ended up in an emergency C-section trying to make sure that neither of you died. And, you know, worst case scenario, he could have died or would have died in the process of trying to go through labor, because just that amount of stress would just have been too much for him. And, you know, she asked me, like, how did you know? Like, how, because, like, there was no indication whatsoever. And that's when I just really understood what that voice had been, that really had been like a prompting from God telling me how to save my baby, the baby that I didn't realize had all of these issues. But that was God really telling me what I needed to do to keep this baby safe. And as, you know, the weeks progressed and we got out of the hospital and we started learning more about Down syndrome, I remember thinking back to that moment and thinking, you know, God really did step in to help save my baby. And I knew that there had to be a reason why I was given Ethan, why I was given that specific baby with Down syndrome, and why he needed to live. We had all of our family in from town. Steven's parents had actually come over from Australia. to come to this baby blessing. And in a lot of these blessings, they say these like things like, oh, you'll go on, we bless you that you'll be able to find a spouse someday, or bless you that you'll be able to like become, get the education that you desire, and that sort of thing. And I remember just having all this anxiety of like, what are they going to bless my baby with? Like, what is he going to bless my baby with? Like, my baby might not ever get married, or my baby might not be able to go to college, or like what, might not be able to do a lot of things. And I remember having all of this anxiety about this baby blessing. And we went into church, and Stephen was the one that did the blessing. And the first thing that Stephen said was that Ethan had been sent here to bring people to Christ. Sorry. Dang it, I didn't think I was gonna cry. And that's the first thing that he said, that Ethan had been sent here to bring people to know Jesus Christ and to love Jesus Christ and accept him into their lives. And that completely, I think in that moment, that just changed me forever. I mean, like, what better blessing can you have than having like kind of this mission to bring people to Jesus and to bring people to know God more. And that completely changed how I viewed my son and how I viewed myself. And kind of what I was talking about in the beginning, it changed the way that I really view the worth of a person. Before I had Ethan, I was just very focused on not only my career, but like how people perceived me. I cared more about how they perceived me, I think, than maybe how I perceived myself or how God perceived me. And I think as I kind of matured and realized that his worth and potential had nothing to do with how other people viewed him and everything to do with how God viewed him and his own actions, I became less worried about how people viewed me or viewed my son, and became much more really just worried about being the best mom that I could. And I kind of felt this responsibility after he received that blessing about, he was put here to bring people, bring people to Christ. I realized that there's a big responsibility on myself and my husband to kind of help Ethan do that, I guess. As his parents, we're a part of that as well. And so I started being much more outward focused. Just even in the neighborhood, we started taking cookies to people and getting to know our neighbors, and we started having all these people over for dinner, and we would try to have Ethan interact with as many people as we could. We'd go visit and things, and it changed my focus. So I mentioned that I had gone down to working just part-time after I had Ethan, and now not at all. So to where 8 years ago, all I really cared about was getting as far ahead in my career and making as much money as possible. And that doesn't even enter my mind anymore. I don't care about having a career. I don't have one right now. It doesn't matter. And I don't worry about those other things. I think about, how am I going to help my son? How am I going to be there for him? And how are the both of us together going to help other people? And that's really what our life has really become about, is helping other people. Just when we wake up and pay attention and realize how many people need help, it's amazing how much help you can actually offer to people, and we've been able to do that. And so as far as what we value and how I find my own worth and what makes me feel good about myself now, Ethan has changed all of that. It has nothing to do with that worldly view of what makes a good person or what makes a successful person. And it has everything to do with, really, are we doing the work that God needs us to do?